My expeditions are really risky, but I approach them with that knowledge, and I try to develop direct mitigations to the hazards, but also keep capacity for the ones that I don't know about, and then get attitudes both in myself and in my teams that will help us recognize new hazards. Like the hazards we know about are not generally the big problem. It's the ones we don't know about, or the evolving situations, or when multiple factors work together. This is when we start having bad outcomes. So how do we recognize as things change? And how do we get our teams to help us recognize that? That's what I'm really interested in.
Welcome back to the 10 Adventures podcast. Today we're talking with Will Gadd. Will is an elite ice climber who was the first person to climb Niagara Falls. He's also an adventurer, speaker, and entrepreneur, and was National Geographic's Adventure of the Year in 2015. And I was fortunate enough to hear Will's inspirational keynote, which was the highlight of a conference several years ago. Hi, Will. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. Looking forward to it here.
I want to learn a little bit about how you grew up. What were the influences that led you to this incredible life you have today?
Which conference were you at? I'm just trying to remember here.
It was Unite the Prairies in Saskatoon. My first time back in I used to spend all my summers there working on the family farm. And it was my first time back in 20 years. And it was it was an all right conference, but it was like a tech conference. And then kind of you came in and I'd heard of you. And I'm like, what's Will doing here? And like, it was just so appropriate to what we were all doing, and then just so energetic and inspirational. So it was like one of those things, I'll give this a go. And then it was like, yeah, just super incredible.
Well, that's awesome. I didn't know that actually. So you probably mentioned it in one of the emails, but I didn't. So that was a great event. Great people. I really enjoyed that, and meshing my world with the entrepreneurial side of the world. And yeah, I mean, that's what I do in some ways. And I'll get to your question. I'm not going to blow that off, but that is what I do. Is I pitch these projects and then try to go and execute them. But it's it's straight up entrepreneur. Execution. So yeah, it's neat. That was one of my favorite events in that time period. Great people and just Alex, the organizer, great guy. Anyhow, moving right on. So to answer your question that you started that with, I grew up in the Canadian Rockies in Calgary and Jasper, and my parents were into the mountains. So every weekend we'd head out and do something in the mountains, and that really gave me a big leg up in the adventure sports world. I got into kayaking, and I was always a skier and a climber. My parents were climbers, but just being comfortable and having some really base skills to be out in the mountains as a young kid was essential, I think.
Do you think maybe how kids are growing up is changing now? Kids don't go out and just wander in the mountains. They don't have these backpacking adventures. And do you think with this kind of focus on technology and indoor play, the kids that are growing up now are going to, maybe lose something that people who spent time without technology in the outdoors had?
I think the world is obviously really different today in terms of technology and screen use and so on than the world I grew up in. And at the same time, it is how it is, and I guess we have to adapt to it. But I think when we can get our kids, or really any of us, outside, that's a good thing. We do better outside, right? Where there's not like trail rage in general. Get like trail rage cam videos or something, right? Like that doesn't happen much. People are just better out there. We're more tolerant of other people. And the time we have out there, I think, is really restorative to our minds and just psyches and how we live. So I think if more people got outside more often, the world would be a better place for sure. And for kids, they need to move. And yet we take them, we put them into these desks and say, you're going to stay here for 8 or 9 hours. I mean, that is some version of hell to kids like me anyhow, and probably a lot of kids, and they got to move and develop those physical skills. And I think we try to make everything really, really safe today. And I'm for that. Like, I don't like accidents. Nobody does. But we lose something if we don't take meaningful risks when we're kids. And we do that under adult guidance and carefully, but you've got to learn how to manage risk. It's a super fundamental skill in life. And if we don't learn to make decisions about it when we're young, then we're probably not going to do a great job of it as we get older. And that's an issue. So yeah, I could go on about this forever. Actually, physical literacy matters. And if we don't move, then we don't get that ability to do different things physically. And I think that's a really big loss today for many people.
Will people probably know you as a Red Bull athlete attempting these audacious human powered journeys? I don't even know how you think of them, to be honest. But for you, like, what's the highlight that you're most proud of? And it might not be one that others, would think of first, but you thought was either really cool or was really rewarding or challenging.
Yeah, I mean, I love the next adventure always. I'm like, that's the thing that's always the most interesting to me. The past is interesting. We have to learn from it, and that's what builds the future. But it's always the next project that I'm fired up about. And as I look back, each project is cool, great people, great experiences. But the thing I'm most proud of, maybe looking back, is that I've survived doing this. What I do is pretty dangerous, and so figuring out ways to survive in these environments and get things done and bring the people I'm with back. That's always the big goal here. And each of these projects has big hazards. So how do I go into these unknown environments with a team of people and bring them back? That's what I try to do. And I guess I'm proud of that record. And it could change. I've had some good luck. I'm certainly not saying that I've done everything right, because I sure haven't. But I've worked pretty hard to make these trips reasonably safe and have had some good luck when I needed it.
One thing that I think that's interesting is you seem to select these really kind of off the wall objectives, paragliding hundreds of kilometers, climbing icebergs, where it's almost like how do you get to that point of, they're totally unconventional? Is that what draws you to these, or are you just thinking of, what's the, most challenging way I can think of doing something, really exhilarating? Like how do you get to these, these great ideas?
I've never thought of them that way. It always seemed logical at the time. These things always seemed like a great idea. Like, go climb icebergs. This is going to be awesome, and then you get out there and it's not like that. But it is still a really cool trip. And I guess for me, and probably a lot of people, if it's been done, it's not very interesting. Like, I've never been very drawn to climb Everest, for example, because, thousands, 15,000 people or something have stood on the summit of Everest. So to me, that's not very interesting. It's also not a place that you're going to potentially learn, or at least I'm not going to learn as much as new areas. In the business side of things, it's like when you go and try to do something that somebody else has done a lot, then you're trying to be like a little tiny bit better. It's incremental. Whereas when you go to places that people haven't been and do things that nobody's ever done, then it's really interesting. There's not a map, and it's a whole new thing. And then somebody else will go there and do it next year and be like, wasn't that hard? It's that iterative process versus what can we do that's really new and really interesting that I find personally drives me.
You've talked already in two of your answers about risk. And I find that really interesting because your expeditions are risky, and you talked about how important risk is in managing it. But can you maybe describe your approach to risk? And also, like, for someone who's maybe not doing something that's as extreme, but still has risk for them, how can a regular person take your approach and make themselves be safer in whatever they're doing?
That's a really interesting question on a lot of levels. And I could, I talk about this a lot, and I'm fascinated by how we take risks. And I guess the first thing I'd say is, my expeditions are really risky, but I approach them with that knowledge, and I try to develop direct mitigations to the hazards, but also keep capacity for the ones that I don't know about, and then get attitudes both in myself and in my teams that will help us recognize new hazards. Like, the hazards we know about are not generally the big problem. It's the ones we don't know about, or the evolving situations, or when multiple factors work together. This is when things get like, we start having bad outcomes. So how do we recognize as things change? And how do we get our teams to help us recognize that? That's what I'm really interested in. And I'm writing this book about surviving and thriving at high hazards. So you asked the wrong question. I could talk about it for hours. But I guess this is what fascinates me. How do we do this? And, I had a really, I don't know what you'd call it, like trial by fire in terms of risk management entering these sports. And a lot of us don't make it through. That's the reality. I've got a lot of friends who aren't here. So trying to develop better tools, and I'm flat out stealing them from a lot of really good industrial practices that I get to work with. Yesterday I was in Ontario speaking at the largest nuclear power plant in the world, and they're good at safety there. So I've tried to bring some of their ideas back to our outdoor culture, and what I'm good at is these evolving situations that often our policies and planning don't allow for. That's kind of the area that I can perhaps help people with. And then as far as our own lives, um, like if you're, you know, I'm pretty good at taking risks in the mountains, but I'm really bad, say, as an investor because I hate losing money. And so I'm like, I'm horrible at it. And I probably haven't taken enough risk. And I think that's actually the bigger problem for a lot of people is how do we take good risks that'll bring us things that we want in life? Like if you don't pick up the phone and call for that date, you don't get it, and maybe the love of your life is getting away. So we've got to take good risks. The downside of that phone call is not very big, but the upside is massive. So I think a lot of what we need to do in our own lives is actually take more risks and understand them better and think about them more and develop kind of a mental model of risk taking that allows us to take good risks, because not taking risks is absolutely, in my view, sort of fatal as a company or a human being. You get stuck where you are. We've got to take risks to go forward and have adventures and be comfortable with the level of failure that we're actually okay with. And that's another whole topic. But sorry, long answer, but this is what I'm thinking about an awful lot. I appreciate the question.
It's interesting you mentioned about like the other side of risk, because actually I was taking notes as you were talking, and one of the things that really hit me was you reframed risk as also opportunity.
Yeah.
And, this was in a business setting, but, we even talk about doing these things for the first time. It's risky, but it's also the opportunity to learn. And I thought, risk isn't all bad.
No.
Because it helps you even just get better at what you do. I'm teaching my kids to ski. So this year they skied black diamonds and they were terrified, but that was a part of them learning it. We're controlling the risk. Nothing bad could happen. But I think it's really interesting how, I don't hear people talking about risk and the other side of it.
Yeah, this is a big deal. You often don't hear the people that want to control the risk talking about the positives of it as much, right? Because especially in our personal lives, like we don't want risk. We want to like have everything under control and it be predictable the next day. And some of that's really good. But if we don't take risks and you take your kids to the ski hill, they can break a leg or something like that for sure. But they'll also get something that lasts their whole lives out of that, which is pretty cool. And then in our, as adults, we have to do that too. If we don't apply for that new job or start that business or do something, then we're stuck there. But it's very uncomfortable to also say, yeah, this might fail. And then what are the consequences if it does fail? What are the consequences of it succeeding? And then I think one thing that's changed to my thinking about risk, both in positive consequences and negative consequences, is I tend to used to look at it kind of binary. Either great things will happen or horrible things will happen. And now I'm trying to think more of the spectrum, and also outside my endpoints on my spectrum. Like, what are the things that I'm not thinking about? And it's a more probabilistic view of risk rather than good outcome, bad outcome. It's like, yeah, well, we might not get to here, or we might blow away by it, and we might end up way down here, or more likely we're going to end up somewhere in the middle there on both sets. So this is interesting stuff to me. I think about it a lot.
You talked earlier about kind of the unknown unknowns. That's the really risky thing. The risks you take. Most rational people, they plan for that, but it's the unknown unknowns. And I was reading a blog post of yours about some people you met, and they were going to go do a climb far above their abilities. I've seen things in outdoor clubs that I've just been thinking, this is insane. You see stuff on message boards where I remember once somebody said, I want to do a nice afternoon hike around Lake Louise. And the first reply is like, you should go do Temple. And it was like a mom and her two kids. And I'm just thinking, good God, like if you go do Temple with like an 8-year-old and a 10-year-old, you're looking for an easy hike. But like, and you hear people with their a GPS app where the app takes them like off a cliff or something. And like, how do people know what they don't know? Because I think we all think we know a lot more. And in most cases in life, it doesn't matter. We have opinions that are not backed by any sort of knowledge. But in the outdoors, when we don't realize how fallible and how unknowledgeable we are, it can end really badly.
This is the thing you don't do in a podcast, but what you just said reminded me of this idea. And I gotta make a note here, man, and the note basically says that what you just said is really important. And I think there are some pretty foundational risk management kind of ideas and policies that work, but I've never thought about it in exactly the way you just said that. And so what are the things that would work across sort of any set of circumstances, be they outdoor? And I use this stuff in my talks, but I think there's kind of like an opportunity in what you just said to make what I'm working on better. So I thank you for that. This is why I love this stuff. I learn shit. So the tools that I teach people, I just haven't organized them as well as I could in a toolbox, but the tools that I try to give people in those situations are an expectation that we don't know everything and to look for change. So when things are changing, is this what we expected to happen or not? And we all tend to get set in our idea. It's like, yeah, we're going, there's a trail. Of course, this is the right thing to do. But is that actually what's going on? So it's this idea, it's a very Buddhist idea of being where you are versus where you want to be or where you've been or where you think you should be or somebody told you should be. It's like, be here now and be alert to those changes and what's going on. And then to expect error. Things are going to go wrong. So rather than going, we're going to execute perfectly here, it's like, okay, errors are going to happen and, let's be alert to them. So those are tools. But I think there's something deeper in what you said, that there's this expectation of competency. And so checking that, are we actually competent in this environment? In your earlier example, it's like, I'm a really all right ice climber, this is what I do, but I don't know anything about icebergs. And now I'm outside my environment off the coast of Newfoundland. So asking ourselves if this is our area of competency, do we actually know how to operate here? Whether we're hiking or biking or whatever. If I get on a snowmobile, I'm really bad at that. That's outside my area of competency. And I need to recognize that fast and own that I'm not that good at it or bad things happen. So I do... Those are some tools like that, your expectations of what is going to happen and asking about your competency in that environment. But it's a deep topic. And I think asking that question is probably a very good place to start too. Do I understand this environment and do I have the tools to operate there? And knowing that I'm fallible and I make errors, do I still want to go ahead in this environment? Because, that mom and her 10-year-old and her 8-year-old, they're very unlikely to actually make it to the dangerous part of the hike on Temple. And if they start hiking up there, it's probably pretty great until they get up to that call that they'll pass there. And then they've got to start making some more decisions and they can look up and go, you know what, I came out for a hike. There's all these people coming down with climbing gear. Is this really what I signed up for? Like, things have changed. And then your kids will be going, oh, we can keep going. Or the kids might be going, this sucks, we want to go home, So I would say, go out and try, but then also expect error, expect change, listen to what's going on, adapt, learn, and do better, which is kind of my mantra over and over again. But a lot in your question. I need to develop a generic set of tools that I can share with people. I think that would be good.
A lot of your success, through these expeditions is resilience, dealing with pain and difficulty and when things don't go how you expect them, going to plan B, C, D, and E. But I wonder, do you think resilience can be learned? Is this something that everyone has an innate aspect and you've just learned to become more resilient? Or is there just something special in your ability to deal with suffering?
No, I'm not. So resiliency is a big topic right now. And people are always like, how do I be more resilient? And I guess my first question would be like, what do you want to be resilient toward? Because some things you should not be resilient toward. You should get out of the way. Like if every morning you walked out and slammed your hand in the door because the screen door was faulty or something, this is not a good time to be resilient. It's a good time to fix the door. And so I hear this a lot. And people are like, well, we've got to teach our employees to be more resilient or my kids to be more resilient. I think maybe it's more interesting to look at why people are resilient and why they aren't. And to me, it usually comes down to they have a goal and they have a team. You can certainly be very resilient on your own, but most people are much stronger when they have a team and a goal. Then they can deal with all kinds of chaos and do really well. And is the thing we're actually wanting to be more resilient about, is that worth being resilient about? I don't know if it is. Maybe we should fix it rather than continue on this crazy path. Or is the goal that I have, is it actually meaningful, like, to me? And or have I defined that goal? And do I have a team to execute it with? I would ask those questions. People are stunningly resilient when they have a goal, whether it's surviving in the ocean, and if they have that team, they're even better at it. If they don't have either of those things or a reason to be resilient, then they're probably not going to be resilient. The flip side of this, from kind of as an expedition leader and manager, is to develop capacity so your team can deal with problems. And by that I mean it's as simple as, on a log expedition, it might be having an extra 5 days worth of food so people don't go hungry. That's going to make them a lot more resilient. Most people are very non-resilient when their stomachs are empty. It tends to become the priority really fast. Or maybe it's allowing more time to do something. Time builds capacity, and capacity adds both safety and success possibilities, right? If you're trying to rush to do something because you haven't built enough time in, then your capacity to deal with problems goes way, way down. And so if you want to be resilient, have resources and know what you want to do, and even better if you have a team, I would say. And then finally, these topics, I could talk forever on this because I find this stuff fascinating, but the final thing is, I do think you can train yourself basically to focus on that long-term goal over the short-term goal if you believe in it. And for me, maybe I'm in the weight room. I really do not want to do another set. This sucks. Let's face it. It hurts. It's painful. I really sometimes don't enjoy this. But if my goal is to climb a big new route, or at my age, still be able to pick my kids up and chuck them, they're getting pretty heavy for that now. It was a good goal for a while. Then I have to do that. So I'm going to keep doing it. But if we don't have that goal, then we'll probably quit. And then if you develop that resiliency of picking up the weight, or that understanding of the long-term goal, then you tend to do better. There are many times in life where I feel like quitting, and I'm like, all right, I don't quit. I pick the weight up, and that's useful. So you can train yourself to overcome the short-term pain toward your goal, but identifying those goals and knowing what they are and believing in them, I think that's resilience to me in a nutshell. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, that's super deep. And I'm just thinking, like, it's a lot of this is around leadership, whether it's leadership of yourself, leadership of a group and an objective outdoors, or just leadership of a team or a business. There's way more similarities than you'd think, just based on how you describe that.
Well, that's what you just said is really interesting. I did a talk recently for a fairly large group of people, and I was hired to talk about resiliency and goal setting. And what I rapidly figured out is, for these people, they were really under-resourced, and they were trying to operate in really difficult conditions. And the idea is, well, be more resilient, keep taking the blows. And I wasn't sure whether I was ever going to get another speaking opportunity from the group again, because I basically said, hey, the problem here, is not probably the people. They've been incredibly resilient. They've had, pay cuts. They've had horrible working conditions, and they're still showing up to work. The problem is not probably the employees here. It may be on the management side, and how can we create an environment that works better? And I was like, I'm never going to get any more work from that organization. But about 6 months later, they called me up and they're like, all right, we hate to admit it, but you might have been right. I don't want to be right. I just wanted to help people do better. So yeah, sometimes we have to dig a little deeper.
I want to switch gears. You're a UN, United Nations representative about the climate. And you talk about the impact of climate change. And I think one thing that is really interesting is how evident climate change is in polar and mountain regions.
Yeah.
I'm heavily involved in the Alpine Club of Canada. We have a State of the Mountains report, and it is super, super visible. And, these are on studies, all over the world. But growing up and living in the Rocky Mountains, do you see the impact of climate change just in, what you do locally in kind of your home playground?
Yeah. I think climbers we're sort of like the canary in the coal mine. We're the first sign that something's going bad. We're out there in the mountains, and you're out there with the Alpine Club, and we see the changes in a radical way. I always compare this to, like, I show up and a big part of my access to the mountains is on glaciers. They're usually good places to travel. So when I show up and half the glacier is missing in a relatively short period of time, or the chunk that I used to use to access some part of the mountains is gone, it's sort of equivalent for the general population if they showed up and half their office building was missing. You'd have questions. So this is what we see as climbers out in the mountains and people in high latitude areas of the world. It's like, yeah, this is a problem and it's very obvious. But if you live in downtown whereverville, it's not as obvious. You show up and your office is still there, but it's changing very, very quickly and it's a problem. And for me, I don't want to yell at people about climate change. This has not worked. This just doesn't work. So in a lot of the films I'm trying to make now, I'm helping scientists go into inaccessible locations and do their research. But I'm hoping that these films also, people can watch them and it's just a friendlier way to reach people and have discussions about this rather than yelling at them. We're so polarized these days. It doesn't matter what you say across the void. You can't do that. But if you can get onto that side with something like a film and engage people, that's good. And then just finally on that topic, I'm very much not about, telling anybody how to live their lives. Like I drive a truck. My house is currently heated with Alberta natural gas, and I'm very grateful for that. So I'm not on the like oil and gas is bad and we have to stop using it program at all. It's like, yeah, long term, this is a problem and it's very imminent, but I'm not gonna, on an individual level and as a societal level, we have to change. That's not the way to do it.
Kind of related to this, you mentioned getting to these remote places, and it seems, the impacts of over tourism and just, more and more people living on this planet. There's a loss of wild places. I see it just in the last 25 years going backpacking in the Rockies. Like I used to go pick up my permits Friday afternoons downtown Calgary, and you could get anything. You could go anywhere. And now those permits are sold out. They open up one day a year and they're sold out in 7 minutes. What do you think we're losing as, these remote places where you have tranquility and peace, that are untouched or undiscovered? What are we losing as just people on this earth as those disappear?
Oh, this is a big topic. I mean, as our world population goes up and our natural areas decrease in size, there's more and more pressure on what's left. And yeah, I see the same things that you do. The areas that I thought I would never see more than like one person and a goat at, I show up now and there's like, whoa, what happened here? Troll Falls is wall to wall people. That's a local area that you've probably been to with your kids and everything. It's great. But the other, I think we have to recognize the importance of these places and preserve what we have. And there's a real push against preserving what we have right now on a lot of levels. And, if we're still around in 500 years, it's not going to be like, wow, you logged this area and got 4 more trees to make paper with. Like that's necessary. But 500 years from now, they might go, wow, they took really good care of this. And that would be a good thing. So the areas that we do still have, I think it's vital to preserve those and also work with different user groups there too. We tend to go into the mountains in one way or an area and say, God, that's the only way to go in there. But we need to have coalitions. It's more important to preserve it than to preserve it in exactly our way. So I think, it's important and it's quick changes in how do we actually do the work to preserve it, not just rant about the destruction of it. That's more important. Do the work. Don't just complain. Do the work.
You have a great quote. It says, you said, it's not about being fearless. It's about learning to function with fear.
Yeah.
And can you talk more about this? And it's obvious on, when any of us challenge ourselves physically in any sort of kind of outdoor activity, but kind of what you talked about today, I feel like it also is around just our lives in general. And do you have any tips for people that are really struggling or ways that you conquered fears that were really hard and you managed to push through and just say, okay, I'm going to deal with this. I'm just going to do what I need to do?
So this is really interesting to me right now, and I'm doing some other work in this area to try to understand it better. But when I was younger, I really wanted to conquer my fears. And I remember being in my kayak at the top of a big drop when I was 16 and puking in the eddy before I paddled over this waterfall or whatever, because I was so, I was horrified. I was terrified of the situation. And I really wanted to, because I thought it would be a great reward to do that. But I knew it was risky, and the conflict between those two would eat me alive. And as I've gotten a bit older, what I've realized is that high levels of fear and trying to like conquer my fear are not the way forward for me or for most people. And so what I try to do now is listen to that fear. If I'm really afraid of something, I'm not like, aha, I shall conquer this. It's like, okay, well, why? And that's what I meant by learning to work with it. It's like, why am I afraid? What's going on? Like a little bit of nervousness is good. It sharpens your brain and your reactions, and a tiny bit of adrenaline. Good stuff. That's good. You should feel a little bit of that before you pick up the phone for that date or whatever. You got to be on it. The trouble is that when you're trying to overcome that in situations where you need fine motor coordination, or to do the skill, or you need to think. When you enter into that highly fearful state, you don't think well. Your motor functions start to decrease. Your fine motor functions, like everything falls apart. So what I'm really interested now is understanding that fear and working with it, and getting to a place where it's useful as opposed to either debilitating or lowers my function too much. So I teach a lot of people to climb, kayak, paraglide. This is something I've done my entire life, and it's really scary for these people. And when I was younger, I was like, tough it up. Yeah, stop being a wuss. And this approach did not work well. I don't know why I kept saying it. I just thought it was the right thing to say, I guess, and that's what I wanted for myself. I wanted to be tougher. So, it just didn't work. And it took me a long time to listen to that and think, okay, what can I learn here? How do I understand this fear? Maybe I'm actually not competent to do what I'm about to do, or maybe I am, or maybe I've missed something. So I'm pretty sure that the primary reason I'm still alive today is because I have pretty high levels of fear and anxiety. Without those, I would just chuck my carcass. But by listening to that fear and anxiety and, asking those questions, am I competent here? What am I not seeing? What are the range of probabilities, and digging into it, then I'm pretty comfortable. And even, I still feel that. I'm getting ready to launch my paraglider. I'm like, man, this is pretty real. And, I get that I want a butterfly in my stomach, but if there's bats there, then I, I need to slow down and figure it out. And also look at that basic equation of consequences, good and bad. If it's the phone call and I'm like, I can't do this, man. I can't call her up for a date or whatever. Like, the consequences are worse in your mind. All she's going to do is say no, or the business person you're pitching might say no. You can walk out of there. That's just one step closer to the next thing that might succeed. But if it's your life, then yeah, I'd maybe think that, listen to that fear and get it, engage with it.
Will, this was such a thought-provoking discussion. Thanks for making time in your busy schedule between engagements and expeditions. You mentioned you're downloading a bunch of photos and working on a book. I really appreciate you taking the time to share this insight.
Yeah, well, I really appreciate it too. You got me thinking about this better container for sort of foundational risk management policies or approaches. Like, I use this in industrial settings and stuff, but that was really worthwhile. It happened because we talked. So thank you very much.
Excellent. If people want to find out more, follow along in your journeys, obviously they can find videos on YouTube, but where can they find out more about you?
Yeah, there's a bunch of stuff on YouTube, but also at Real Will Gadd on Instagram, and willgadd.com. You'd update that site a little bit. But yeah, both those, you'll reach me, and all the other channels and so on. I'm out there. And yeah, if people have questions or ideas or want to talk about risk or kids or adventure or business, I love talking to people. We can talk for hours here, man. So I do appreciate when people reach out, and it might take me a bit, but I'll get back.
I'll put links to your socials in the show notes. Also, if you're at a conference and you see Will's name somewhere on there, make the time to go to that one. You might think, what's a mountaineer, ice climber, paraglider, kayak dude going to teach me? But you got a little bit of the taste. I think it was about an hour of just a ton of wisdom. I have a whole page of notes of just like ideas that, are just really valuable in your personal life, in your career, and then obviously doing these great expeditions. And with that, thank you for listening to this episode of the 10 Adventures podcast. If you like the show, why not subscribe, give us a like, or drop a comment on one of the episodes. And if you're looking to plan an adventure of your own, why not check out our website, 10adventures.com, where we have over 1,000 different adventures spread across 85 countries. We will be back next week to explore the world and hear about more epic adventures. Bye-bye. Start planning your own adventure by visiting us at 10adventures.com and listen to other episodes of the 10 Adventures podcast on Amazon Music, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or anywhere else you find your podcasts.